I talked to you a little bit about the art of rhetoric. Now I'm going to talk to you about the art of practical reasoning, and I'm going to focus on dialectic in particular. Because the aim of this approach that we have adopted to teaching people debate depends on cultivating the mental habits of wisdom and eloquence simultaneously, because they work together. Dialectic provides the wisdom, rhetoric provides the eloquence, and when you combine them, you have a winning combination. And according to Richard Weaver, he concludes an essay called The Cultural Role of Rhetoric with this really striking statement. He says, in the restored man, dialectic and rhetoric will go along hand in hand as the regime of the human faculties intended that they should. I'm going to say that one more time so you can savor it a little bit. In the restored man, dialectic and rhetoric will go along hand in hand as the regime of the human faculties intended that they should. I think he was trying to be eloquent when he was talking about how we are designed. I think that's just a philosophical way of saying we're designed such that dialectic and rhetoric are supposed to go hand in hand so that we have a well-ordered mind. And we're at home in the realm of ideas. So I just wanted to go to the overview page on the ring because that's where it has the next vignette I would like to give you is the art of practical reasoning as I define it. Cultivating the intellectual abilities to identify and evaluate assumptions. Identifying assumptions is one operation. Evaluating those assumptions for truth value, picking them apart, that's another question. That's a question of truth. Identifying assumptions is a matter of validity, the form of the argument. That's a whole lesson that I don't have time to teach right now. But when you are reasoning practically, these operations happen simultaneously within the blink of an eye. To see an assumption is to critique it, right? When you see the assumption, when it jumps out at you, it's like, oh, that's bogus. It's effortless, it's seamless. But for the purposes of pedagogy, which is to say for the purposes of teaching, you need to divide out the process of first identifying assumptions by applying rules of logic to ferret out presuppositions and assumptions, and then applying tests for truth. The tests for truth that I teach most often are two: knowledge of fallacies and dialectic. And here's why. Dialectic is the most fundamental test for truth in matter that is debatable, in the contingent realm. You talk about that? Okay. The contingent realm is just the realm where things are debatable. Honest people can disagree about what is the right thing to do or who is the right person to vote for.
We talked about debatable motions and how we can interpret a parley motion in a non-debatable or subjective.
Okay. When you're in that arena, there are certain tools that are really appropriate to help you thrive in that arena and to succeed in debating points of view, where points of view are debatable. The arena that I studied for my doctoral dissertation is medical ethics committees, in particular in the care of babies. There were several children's hospitals in Seattle where I was getting my PhD, and I got hooked up with my mentor to be on several different ethics committees in children's hospitals. And so I recorded the deliberations, and you had differing points of view, competing points of view about what is the right thing to do. And it wasn't just a coin toss. I mean, they weren't being arbitrary or random or relativistic. They just looked at things from a different point of view. And so they brought their perspective, and they were trying to work out as a team on behalf of the other What is the right thing to do here? Okay, so phronesis is very, very active in that. And dialectic is also very, very important in doing well in that arena. So the first step in that kind of practical reasoning, reasoning in the contingent realm about actual cases where people, honest individuals, can disagree about what is the right thing to do. The first intellectual ability that you need to cultivate is the ability to identify and evaluate assumptions and to follow an argument to its conclusion. Have you ever noticed how many people just really have a difficult time following an argument to its conclusion? They just get derailed so easily and they don't have the ability to focus. And I think that's getting worse and worse, obviously, because of technology. I just had a kid tell me the other day that was, I think he was 16, and I was teaching him online, and he said, "I'm sorry, but President Reagan's speech at the wall in Berlin was just too slow for me. When I put it on 1.5 speed, it was just about right." And my immediate response was, do you think it's possible that the discourse conventions that were appropriate in his day don't match up with the speed of life today on the internet? Things come at you so fast and furious that it feels boring. I'm probably boring you right now because I'm not a fast speaker. And you're used to debate style, right? We're doing it debate style. Okay. All right, spotting contradictions and faulty logic. If you just throw a joke in, then nobody notices how slow you're going. Okay, this is where dialectic is really focused because the essence of dialectic is a search for contradiction, the application of the law of contradiction or non-contradiction, depending on how you learned it. But one of the fundamental intellectual abilities that you need to cultivate in order to be good at practical reasoning is spotting contradictions and then just spotting fallacies. Everybody studies fallacies, right? Everybody knows that stuff. Not everybody knows Aristotelian dialectic like I teach it. And I'm going to teach it to you in about 8 minutes. I'm not even going to take 10 minutes. And I'll teach you everything I know about Aristotelian dialectic, which is kind of sad if you think about it. Okay. And then to learn to draw appropriate distinctions. I really like my elaboration of this, but I don't think I have time to do it right now. But just believe me, one of the fundamental intellectual abilities you need to cultivate is to split hairs where it's appropriate to split hairs. You should not go around splitting hairs all the time. You'll have no friends. How many of you learned that the hard way already? Don't raise your hand. But court of law. Court of law. Where's the difference between discipline and abuse? Is there a fine line in a given case? Sure can be. And so the ability to make that fine distinction where there is a fine distinction to be made is really a good intellectual ability to cultivate. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. And then avoiding extremes, I think, is the mark of a practically wise person. We are not given to extremes. Conservative people are not extremists. Is anyone conservative anymore? Or what does that mean? Yeah. Well, we need to make some distinctions. But anyway, back when there was consensus that, we are conservative Christians, it was agreed that balance is good and extremism is bad. Although Barry Goldwater had that cute little phrase about extremism in the defense of truth is no vice or something. And restraint is no virtue when truth is on the line. I guess I can see what he was getting at, but I still think because I got it from Richard Weaver and Russell Kirk, I'll even tell you that, because I got it from studying conservatism from Richard Weaver and Russell Kirk, that the true conservative temperament avoids extremism and ideology. Not ideological, ideologues. Okay, so, all right, exercising foresight. I love this. I think it was James Madison wrote that the genius of the founders is that they avoided the consequences of factions by seeing in the principle the eventual outcome, and they avoided the eventual outcome by negating the principle. Did you follow that? The foresight that they had was genius because they could see where the pernicious effects of factions would eventually undo the nation, so they built in checks and balances to check the effects of factions. So I think this is really powerful. And you know what? Let's talk about practical matters here, friends. When you get out into the workaday world, if you have the ability to pique the imagination and use language masterfully to evoke vivid imagery in the minds of your audience, and you also have the ability not only to gather data and analyze that data, I'm talking his lingo now, but you also have the ability to exercise foresight and make some accurate predictions about what will likely be the case if we go down this road, you will be highly valued in the workplace, in the community. Yeah. So exercising foresight is really powerful. And in my mind, that's really just, this is reductionist, I'm sure, but I think foresight is really a matter of solid practical reasoning abilities combined with imagination. There's probably some more going on there. Good speculative reasoning, I suppose. Okay, so 3 basic tools: syllogistic logic, dialectic, and common material fallacies. If you could just show these, Isaiah, yeah. So, of all of these, I'm asking you now, which do you think syllogistic logic has to do with? Which of these intellectual abilities does syllogistic logic have to do with? It's not rocket science. One and two? Definitely. Yes? No. Syllogistic logic is not a test for truth. It has to do with validity, right? Okay, so spotting contradictions, dialectic. Evaluating assumptions, dialectic and common material fallacies. Faulty logic, common material fallacies. Do you see? Then these are the outcome of learning. These are the 3 basic tools in a liberal arts education that equip you for reasoning in this fashion. They amount to a hammer, a pair of pliers, and a saw. They're the basic tools of thinking quickly on your feet, of reasoning through difficult questions, and being at home in the realm of ideas. This is what kids were taught in the dialectical phase of education all through the Middle Ages and on into the Renaissance.
For classical educators, the dialectic phase would be your second. So grammar, dialectic, rhetoric. Sometimes you call it grammar, logic, rhetoric, right?
Yeah. Dorothy L. Sayers, Lost Tools of Learning, she uses dialectic. I like it because I'm really all about dialectic and rhetoric working together. So I try to push that. Logic, sure. That's what most people call the second phase of liberal arts education. But that's kind of a generic term for cultivating intellectual abilities. But dialectic is really important for the following reasons. Number one, let's just take everything off there. I'm just going to do this. Dialectic may be understood as a three-step process wherein you, one, begin with a proposition or an assumption, a statement, a presupposition. Then you, two, push it to its logical conclusion, drawing out implications. That's done through questioning. And three, you apply the law of contradiction. You shine a big old spotlight on any contradictions you find. And it's, number two, exemplified in the Socratic method. Now we're going to relate to this, I hope. If you've been educated such that you've ever read any Platonic dialogues. Have you ever read any Platonic dialogues? It takes Socrates 10 pages to get to the point, right? So, and talk about being impatient. Modern or postmodern Americans do not have A, the imagination, or B, the patience to read a dialogue that takes 10 pages to get to the point. But you think about the method that's exemplified in what they're doing. What did your teacher teach you today down at the banks of the Ulysses? Oh, it was fascinating. We were talking about what is the highest good for human beings. Oh, I can think of no more important topic. And then he starts asking questions, right? So you ask questions. Now I have a question for you. From what you read in those dialogues, is that a random questioning process going on there? Are they just asking random questions? No, it's going somewhere. It's going somewhere deeper and deeper. It's boring down to the first principles upon which the argument rests. Do you hear me? The second step of the dialectic as a process is pushing it to its logical conclusion, drawing out implications by asking questions. And that's what they're doing over those 10 pages. If this is true, then this must follow. And if this follows from that, then surely this would be the case. Would it not be then that several pages back we agreed that this is the case, and now you're telling me thus is the case? It cannot be that and this simultaneously. Which is it? Apply the law of contradiction. So, once you get down to the principle upon which the argument rests, you shine the law of contradiction on it, expose the contradictory element within the argument, and then you're supposed to embrace that which is free of contradiction. Okay, I can see people start to gloss over. You haven't had supper yet, have you? This is a lot when your blood sugar's low. Sorry about that. But just think about this. It could be understood as a three-step process. It's exemplified in the Socratic method, and it really is a search for contradiction. And it's very, very persuasive. If you can do the dialectic in your debate, you'll really persuade a lot of people. Because essentially what you're doing is you're taking them by the hand and walking them through all the implications that take them down to the starting point of the argument that you're opposing. And then you shine a big light on what you find contradictory in there. And it's like undeniable if you do it well. Okay, well, Dr. Tallmon, how do you do the dialectic? It sounds a lot like this. The hand bone's connected to the wrist bone bone's connected to the arm bone's connected to the elbow. Why do you think I would say that? Because it's really late and our blood sugar's low and you're trying to, that's half of it. It's connecting the dots for people. You're showing the ligaments and joints between the parts of the argument that take them down to the bottom line. I also try to illustrate it as it's kind of like peeling back layers of an onion until you get down to the core. And when you get down to the core, if there's a blatant contradiction, especially a self-contradiction, just resting there for everyone to see, and then you shine the light of truth on it, that's super persuasive. So, dialectical reasoning, if you use it in your argumentation, is really powerful. And Aristotle says in the Topica, this comes from the Topica of Aristotle, it's where he teaches dialectic. He says, dialectic may be understood, he said it's good for the use in debate, but it's really also good for personal growth. Because once you can learn how to identify contraries, then you have but just to embrace one of the two possibilities. And then that makes you, helps you become a better person. But he also says, dialectic may be understood as a process of criticism. Listen to this. A process of criticism wherein lies the path to the principles of all inquiries. I'm going to say that one more time. Close your eyes and just listen. It's brilliant. He says, dialectic may be understood as a process of criticism wherein lies the path to the principles of all inquiries. In other words, when you cultivate the ability to reason dialectically down to those principles, you will find how physics and music and mathematics and grammar are all unified, where ideas come together. And when you learn to reason that way, and it's second nature for you, you're going to have quite a well-honed ability to be at home in the realm of ideas and to reason well. You had your hand up a second ago.
I was going to say that one of the innovations we've made since last we talked together was I've been teaching them to have a debate where they divide it into two sections. Section one is how to decide, call that a layer of the onion, and then on that basis, here are facts and information that should naturally lead you to a conclusion, right? So
why to decide?
Yes.
Nice. Good. Simplicity is good. All right. So that's my primer on Aristotelian dialectic. When people talk about, when you get to college and people start talking about dialectic, chances are they're talking about Hegelian. They're presupposing Hegelian dialectic. Hegelian dialectic is not Aristotelian dialectic. For the following reason. Hegelian dialectic is based on a thesis, and through exchange in society, dialogue, discussion, questions, and everything, the argument progresses until there is the antithesis. And from the thesis and the antithesis, according to Hegel, a synthesis arises, and that in turn becomes a new thesis. And then over time, you come up with the antithesis, a new synthesis, and that's how ideas improve. If you know anything about dialectical materialism in communist thought, this is the equivalent of that in phenomenology, in idea making. Okay, so anyway, Hegelian dialectic embraces contradiction and tries to use it for constructive purposes. Aristotelian dialectic is based on the law of contradiction, rejecting contradictions. So they're diametrically opposed, really. But this is This is the hot item for the last 100 years in academia. And it feeds right into social construction of knowledge. I know you've heard about that. Okay. Well, I think everybody wants to get out of here. I probably shouldn't try to talk about the cultural role of rhetoric. Yeah.
We'll bring you back.
They were overloaded 10 minutes ago.
Felt it.
Read the cultural role of rhetoric on the rhetoric, that tribute to Richard Weaver. It's really cool. Let me just say this, because we saw evidences last night that America's about ready to unravel. Am I right? Social cohesion has suffered. And the cultural role of rhetoric is to build cultural cohesion. You know how? Shared presuppositions. Common core values that are held in common between us in community and subscribe to. And rhetoric, rhetoric in part, taps that pool of shared values when making arguments, when you're not really actually arguing about values, but you're arguing from your values. People have to embrace that in order to see the world the way you intend it. And when that happens communally, it replenishes the well springs of social bonds. Do you want me to say that one more time? It replenishes the well springs of social bonds. The cultural role of rhetoric blows my mind. It's mystical. It's about unity and community. And Richard Weaver discusses it better than anybody else I know. And T.S. Eliot is right there with him. And America needs that. Thanks for giving me the mic. Hope you don't regret it.